My name is Anna, and I attended Ryerson from first year to first semester of second year, so 2014 to 2015. I switched schools to go to OCAD, and I'm studying digital futures now, and I'm in my second year.
Hi, my name's Mary. I'm in fourth year architecture studio.
I'm Kathleen Collins. I'm finishing my fourth year of architecture at Ryerson with a speciality in design.
My name is Tess Hoover. I'm in my final year of the architectural science program, and I'm doing my major in project management.
My name is Masha Etkin. I'm a professor of architecture in the Department of Architectural Science.
It was a very big, intense learning experience. There's a huge learning curve just in terms of all the hardware being thrown at you and all the software skills that you need to learn immediately.
Stressful.
I think it's pretty good overall. I mean, our program's pretty difficult at times, but I think that once you get past that learning curve of like, how long does it actually take me to do something? You know, like once you do it once, you can do it a million times after in a fraction of the time. But it's like learning it for the first time that's really hard, and like keeping up with everybody else. It's hard when everybody's working all the time, and you have to try to find a balance between like life and school, and it's hard to do that often, especially because we're students and we're young and there's so many things that we want to do. It's hard to be like, I'm only going to do school. I definitely have had trouble with that before, but once you like figure out, and it's a really great tool to like figure out who you are when you're like sitting alone in your room for hours clicking around on Photoshop. You kind of learn to prioritize things that are important to you, and things that aren't important to you kind of fall to the back, and then you figure out what you like and what you don't and who you are.
I would say that it's gotten easier every year. I would say that the learning curve, especially in the first and second years, is enormous. Like you get warned going into architecture or even just university in general, like, oh, you know, like you might think that you're walking on easy street getting 90s or whatever to be able to get into a program like this, and then you're like, oh, you know, it'll be okay. I'm used to, you know, devoting a lot of time and a lot of effort in my homework and my studies, and then you come here and you're just hit like with a wall, and I think a lot of it is to do with it's very specific right off the get-go. It's not like we kind of ease into it. It's like right from day one we're in architecture.
Yes and no. Yes, in terms of students with other students, but in terms of teachers with students, I wouldn't say it's the most inclusive. And I'm saying this in a very indirect way of when you have to pick your courses, there are less women profs to choose from and less choice in making that as well.
When I started here, I did. I think that I've had experiences in the past that have made me question that a lot, and made me question like how people are treated. As time goes on, professors often pick favorites, and if you're not within those favorites, you just kind of are background filler in the room, and people don't really notice you. And it's really hard to get noticed if you don't get noticed right away. People don't remember who you are, they don't know what you're doing or what's important to you, and it's hard when you're trying to figure that out for yourself to have someone kind of deem you as less important than someone else.
Inclusive, I think that if you've made it in, it's easy to find friends that have similar interests than you, if not anything else.
Yeah. Well, architecture as a whole is very elitist. I feel like there's a lot of pressure put on the smallest details that don't really matter. But then looking into like even a major, like a smaller scope of that elitist field, being a woman has its disadvantages because architecture is a predominantly male-run field. I think personally for me, it's like my physical build that can kind of put me at a disadvantage in terms of like design build projects.
I do feel different as a woman. pretty often. I mean, at the beginning I didn't really notice it because I was kind of putting myself in a box. Like I like to do my hair and wear my makeup and dress up like every day. That's something that I find really important, and I do it every day because it's a priority to me. And I find that oftentimes I get put in a box about caring about that, and that's kind of seen as like not as smart as maybe someone who doesn't prioritize that, just based on like assumptions that people make all the time. That like someone, like maybe a girl that cares about her appearance a lot and talks about it often, or like goes out with her friends often, she like doesn't care about school and she's not very smart, because those are the things that are important to her. And I found that like for the first few years at school, I kind of like put myself in that box, and I was like, oh yeah, people didn't expect a lot from me, and I found that I was not expecting a lot for myself, and that's kind of what had happened.
For sure. I definitely think that the faculty is changing though. And I think that the professional field is changing in a broad sense.
I feel like the treatment, for the most part, is relatively equal. But I think that the other factors that revolve around grading and stuff like that, that's where the differences arise. I mean, I've had a lot of situations where there's been little comments made to me here and there, stuff that I didn't think was significant, and those all add up, and then they make you feel a certain way about yourself within the faculty. In third year, you work on a project with a partner. In the first semester, you each do your own project, and then the second semester, you join up with another person and either do a completely different project or continue their project on. I worked with a partner, and we were continuing his project on. He was very attached to his design, as most people would be if they were having their project developed by someone else, but in a way that he was undermining me because I was a woman. And I knew that because I'd had a few conversations with him about it. For one deadline, he didn't submit any of my work. He didn't let me talk during the presentation, and I was just like flabbergasted the entire time. None of my work was on the board, it was his work. He didn't like what I was doing, he never told me. He just didn't place it in the project. And my professor that was grading us at the time had to ask and say like, maybe we should let Kate talk now. And I didn't have anything to say because none of it was mine. Later on, as we continued working, he would make little comments that I was his assistant and I was just helping him out doing his project, and it like wore on me a lot, I guess. Like I didn't really feel it felt like I was working on a group project, and I wasn't, like there was 7 other people and we were splitting it equally, but he was the 7 other people, and then it was me. So I wasn't included at all. And I think that semester was really eye-opening for me. Stuff like that seems really small and insignificant when it happens and when people say those comments to you, but in reality they just add together, and it's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts is how I would put it. Because when it happens to you, you're like, oh, I don't need to tell anyone about this. This isn't an issue. But when it happens more and more, you're kind of like, okay, like this person is like wearing on me. Like, what do I do? He's undermining me and my abilities. He doesn't think that I can do it. And I'd accused him of being a misogynist, and he told me he wasn't a misogynist because he had a sister, which doesn't have anything to do with that. He would make comments about, I don't know, things that weren't any of his business, like abortion, or how women's pockets were small on the front of jeans because we didn't need to carry anything in there, and stuff like that. It was just like a lot, and it just all contributed to the fact that the way he was acting towards me was because I was a woman, and he didn't think that I could do anything that would be worthy of his time and effort on that presentation. Another event that had happened was I had a professor, and he made comments to me in the past that he didn't use the same language with male students as he would use with me. He called my drawings saucy one time, which is like, would you say that to a male student? Probably not. You wouldn't tell him his drawings were saucy. One time he called me a fun party girl, told me that I could take the criticism because I was a fun party girl, which is something that I just like laughed off, like, oh, like hee hee, I'm in that box right now, putting myself in that box. Like, that's pretty funny, but it contributed to that, me placing myself in this like identity that I like don't really feel like I conform to at this point, and it's not really important to me, and it perpetuated that feeling. And another time he made a comment to me, he asked me if I wore my nice outfit because my presentation was bad, like to distract from the presentation. And I told him no, I didn't. But I was really uncomfortable. Those situations make you feel like you've got like a million eyes on you, and you're like, oh, maybe I should have wore something else so he wasn't staring at me like this. It was really weird. And a different prof I also had another time, he said like, oh, what are you still doing here? And I was like, oh, I had you last semester. He got the times confused. He thought I had already graduated. And I said no, and he said, well, at least you look older. Which just had nothing to do with anything either. So it was just another comment about the way that I look, so.
There was one professor in second year who said certain things about our studio that I didn't necessarily agree with because I found it unprofessional. Yeah, he was just saying who was going to become an architect in his eyes and who wasn't. So that was just very unprofessional of him.
What was that like based on? Just like marks or?
Based on marks, yeah, not even like design process or like if they actually tried or anything. It's just on marks and if you like them or not. Yeah.
I had a summer placement with with Metrolinx, and I worked in their capital projects group, and so it was kind of a mix of things. So not to go into it, but they don't do any of the design for their construction projects. Obviously, there's a lot of construction projects that Metrolinx is a part of. So the office that I was working in was kind of the back end of things, cost consulting and the project management aspect of things. So focusing on one line for Go Transit. And we would have the opportunity, I was a summer student, there were interns there, and it was a mix of disciplines there too. I was the only architecture student, but there was an urban planning student, a civil engineer, so all related faculties or whatever. And the kids had many opportunities throughout the summer to go out on site, which is great exposure to see actual work being done. And we went all throughout kind of the GTA looking at different projects, but there was one man who it was me and another girl and then two male summer students, so all around the same age, 20, 21, 22. And the man was talking about how we would have the opportunity if we wanted to go and see a site at night, so night work for a construction project. Great, that's great experience, great to put on a resume, but he made a point to say, oh, you guys should all be interested, it would be great if we could get you all to go out at the same time. But he made a point to be like, if it was just you and the other girl, I wouldn't take you, because I don't want that liability on me as one singular man taking two young female workers on site at night. And there was a part of me that was like, okay, I guess I understand why he has to feel so nervous about doing that. And it's definitely, it's not unmerited that he would have that kind of precaution. But at the same time, that's a judgment based off of, my gender, not of who I am as a person. Like, he didn't even know me. There's no way that he could have assumed that I would be the one to stir up trouble, you know what I mean, on site. That it was just like, whoa. So I could see his side, and I was also questioning his side, so it was like a little bit of a weird
situation.
Yeah.
Well, sorry that you.
Yeah, it was
like
weird,
that,
and it was one of those things too where he said it, and the girl and I were like, ah, and then like we walked away and we like thought about it for a second. We were like, wait, that was kind of weird that he said that if it was just her and I, like that wouldn't be okay, even though if it was those two, the guys and him, that would have been perfectly fine.
I honestly didn't say anything. It's hard when you're in this program, or any program really, not just specifically this program, but to report events that happen like that. Because as soon as that other person is notified, they know exactly who you're talking about. It's hard to anonymously report events like that. And especially if, just in general, like how do you go about reporting it? I wouldn't know where to go. I don't know where to go. Yeah, it's just like not something that I would do. I think that there's a lot of events held not only at Ryerson but in the city that are about women in architecture and celebrating us, and those are really important. But I think talking about the negative things that could happen, not only in school but in the professional field, like these are things that you could experience in the future. This is what makes it not okay. It would make people to be able to identify those tiny cuts before they become something bigger, before you're like, oh, I've been being singled out because I'm a woman in this situation. Like before, if you can identify those things smaller and identify that they're problems, then you can speak up earlier. You can maybe be able to say just to someone, like if they make a one-off comment, you can say, hey, that's not okay. But if you don't, then they just go on for longer and they build up.
This year I went to an Inclusivity in STEM conference, and that was really inspiring. And I just thought it was funny that I think I might have saw a poster for it, or maybe I got an email notification, which, you know, is fair enough. They definitely notified for us to go to it. But when I mentioned it to like my friends in architecture, none of them had even like, and it's just one of another like 100 emails that you get every week that you just kind of scroll through and go to the junk.
There are issues of power imbalances that come from seniority in the program. People who have just been here longer, professors of that nature. I think it, oftentimes some of the older professors that are here, that they feel that they can just say whatever they want. Doesn't matter. And oftentimes, if it's the truth, if they believe it to be the truth, then there's no arguing that. And it's hard because if you cause a stir, you're in someone's bad book. And those professors all talk to each other. So if you reported an event, that prof talked to someone else, you're a troublemaker. And they don't want troublemakers. They just want you to do your program, do your project how they want you to, and graduate. And come back and do your master's and then give them all your money. I think that just opening up that conversation, telling people that there are problems, could encourage a conversation. I write spoken word for Ryerson. I'm part of the Poetic Exchange. I performed a poem not too long ago called The Architecture School Boys, and I talked about all of these issues. I posted it on my Instagram, and after that had happened, I had several people come up to me and say, I didn't know that these things were going on, and now that you've said that, I've kind of identified issues that I've had. I didn't really realize they were problems, and now I have. And those aren't conversations that we have with each other. I've never talked to anyone else in our entire department about these issues. It's not conversations that we have with each other as women. We don't talk about these things at all. Just, I want to have us all together, have a conversation, have people in the professional field share their experiences, have people in the program, graduates, alumni, share their experiences. I just want people to be aware of the realities, because that's step one of all the other steps. And there's other professional fields that have handled this in different ways, and I think it's better than we've handled it. I feel like it's not a conversation people are really willing to have. And I think that comes from seniority, who you know, the structure of even the firm system, even that way. Like, it's all who you know, what they can do for you, and you don't want to make anyone upset because people talk, and you don't want to be trouble. So you had mentioned a while ago that you were the first woman hired in the faculty.
Yes. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, about my background. I grew up in Soviet Union, which was Soviet Russia, which with all its enormous, so to speak, atrocities and authoritarian regime and all of the negative aspects of that society, one aspect was positive. There was no female discrimination. And therefore, I grew up in the society as an absolutely equal member. So when I went through the School of Architecture, we were 50%. Women were 50%, and we were expected to be as good as anybody else, and we were. So when I came to Canada in 1975, I didn't realize that architecture / even more so engineering is men's world. I grew up in a really, from the point of view of gender egalitarian society, totally considered myself capable and equal to men. So I applied to graduate school at the University of Toronto, was accepted, and made the statistics of being one female graduate student. When I graduated and got my master's degree at U of T, I started looking for work. And it never occurred to me that there's no female faculty members, particularly in the Polytechnic University that Ryerson was, that it was absolutely men's work. But you know, when you're not aware of it and you're totally confident, you don't pay attention to limitations. So I was, to some extent, I was very naive and therefore successful. If I only knew that there was such a social expectations of women never being involved in this aspect of professional life, I probably would be too timid to ask, but I wasn't. So when I applied for the tenure track position in '89, I was the first female who got tenure in architecture. There was one woman before me, but it was a different program. She was in landscape, and it was a completely different conditions. So that's how, and since then, that's why I'm saying it's almost 30 years. When I just came, I would have 5% women in the class, if I was lucky. And I used to call the women into my office and say, you have to be better than anybody else. You have to be the best. You have to be the best, because that's the way to make it in the men's world. And they were the best. They worked hard. They always were most driven. I always found my female students being much more self-driven than the men.
Since you started,
Since I started, things changed. I'm now coming from a faculty meeting, which I told you I will be maybe delayed at, where a candidate for the new teaching position was presenting her lecture. She's a very young female architect. Out of 4 candidates that we've interviewed so far, were 2 women, 2 men, and we're absolutely equally considering women and men. Probably prefer women at this point, even though I think this is unfair. I think we should be absolutely view men and women as there's no reason to, so to speak, to discriminate against men. They also have a right to exist.
Yeah. So do you think?
So ever since then, the trend is very clear, and by now we have 6 or 8 female faculty members out of 27. Still not 50%, but we're getting there, and we will get there.
Yeah. So times are changing.
Times definitely changed, definitely, and to the better.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's one optimistic side of our time.